Thanks for tuning in to Murder Murder News, your true crime source for missing persons, breaking cases, survivor stories, and cold cases, plus recommendations for the newest TV shows and podcasts. If you're feeling a little lonely in this pandemic world, we invite you to come join us in our true crime cult as we fight for answers to cold cases and maybe pet some baby goats. I'm Aurora.
And I'm Angelina. Cults are no fun alone, so don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell all of your true crime friends to join the commune at patreon.com/murdermurdernews. This is the Week in True Crime.
We do want to issue a disclaimer that while our name is Murder Murder News, we often focus on missing persons, survival stories, and sexual assault, giving preference to cases affecting BIPOC and LGBTQIA communities, and some that may not be getting enough attention by mainstream media. Our intent is to bring attention to these cases and make sure these stories are told from the perspective of the victim or survivor. We do our best to report accurate information about these cases, but because they are still breaking, it can be hard to find reliable information. We love hearing your feedback, so just send us a message if the information we have researched is inaccurate or out of date, if you just think we got it wrong, or if you want us to help share you or your loved one's story. Our email is always open at murdermurdernews@gmail.com.
This week, serial killer Joseph Edward Duncan III died of brain cancer at the age of 58. Duncan was awaiting execution at the Terre Haute Federal Correctional Institution in Indiana when he was diagnosed with stage 4 glioblastoma late last year. At the time, it was predicted by his doctor that he had 6 months to a year to live. He underwent brain surgery in October of 2020, but refused the treatments of chemotherapy and radiation. Joseph Edward Duncan III was most known for the brutal murder of an Idaho family, the Groenies, and the kidnapping and torture of their 2 youngest children, 9-year-old Dylan and 8-year-old Shasta. After reportedly stalking the family for some time, Duncan struck in May of 2005, killing Brenda Groene, her 13-year-old son Slade, and her boyfriend Mark McKenzie before driving away with the 2 young children. Dylan and Shasta were missing for 7 weeks before Joseph Duncan and Shasta were discovered eating together at a Denny's restaurant. Denny's employees called 911 to report seeing Shasta, whose face was on a missing poster right outside the diner. Duncan was arrested on site, and Shasta survived to tell the traumatic story of torture and abuse that she and her brother were subjected to, which ultimately escalated to the murder of her brother Dylan. Once in custody, authorities connected Duncan to a number of kidnappings, assaults, and murders of other children, including 10-year-old Anthony Martinez, who was abducted from Beaumont, California in 1997, 11-year-old Sammy Jo White, and her 9-year-old half-sister, Carmen Cubillas, who disappeared from a Seattle motel in 1996. Survivor Shasta Groene, now known as Shasta McLean, issued a statement saying, in part, "One thing is for sure, he does not exist anymore. Now we can live our lives knowing that. For so long, I've been struggling with hate towards that man. Today, I woke up feeling like my soul was finally free. I hope other people affected by Joseph Duncan were able to wake up feeling the same way." To hear more about the criminal history of Joseph Edward Duncan III, his victims, and Shasta's amazing story of survival, be sure to tune in to this week's episode of our podcast, Murder Murder News, the Listen Edition, which is also out today.
We have an update to the murder of Egypt Covington. If you're unfamiliar with her case, it's unfortunately pretty horrific. 27-year-old Egypt was found murdered in her home near Ann Arbor, Michigan on June 23, 2017. I know I can tell just by looking at her photos how kind and just lovely she was. And by all accounts, that's absolutely accurate, and she was just adored by her family and friends. Egypt was getting ready to move in with her boyfriend, Curtis Meadows, and the two were planning on living together in her duplex in Van Buren Township while they saved up to buy a house together. The night of her murder, she went to 2 yoga classes, and they went home to get cleaned up for Curtis's move-in. When Curtis didn't hear from her the next day, he began to worry. He tried calling her from work many times throughout the day with no answer. After he got off work, he went to Egypt to check on her. According to his interview with True Crime Daily, he thought something wasn't right when he saw her car in the driveway. When he walked up to the door, he noticed the door was ajar and her dog, Ruby, was inside. Curtis found Egypt on the ground, bound with her hands behind her back, tied up with Christmas lights with blood on her head. She'd been shot on the back right side of her head the night before. Police immediately suspected that whoever killed Egypt knew her well. There appeared to be no signs of a break-in, no signs of a struggle, and no robbery. Yet there was no movement on her case until March of 2018, when police named her ex-boyfriend, Kenny Michalak, as a person of interest. But Kenny had a pretty solid alibi, and Egypt's family didn't believe Kenny was a person of interest since pretty early on. And we spoke with her brother, Dwayne Turner, and his fiancée, Lindsay Ann, who have both been tirelessly searching for answers about what really happened. In fact, Lindsay has been so dedicated to justice for Egypt that she started a podcast, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, to bring attention to the case. Here are Dwayne and Lindsay Ann. I do want to talk about Michigan State Police taking over the case from the Van Buren Police Department. I know that was something that your family had been fighting for and had been adamant about. What finally caused them to hand it over to MSP?
Oh, geez, a lot of work. So we had to badger every day. Where should we start? We sent emails. We emailed the departments, the department heads, the township supervisor who's in charge of the law enforcement in the township. We attached state representatives, all of the trustees. We wanted to get this word out, and we emailed every day. Nothing, we weren't getting too many responses. So we went to the township meeting. We surprised them there and had it all on record. We asked the hard questions. Lindsay was all over that. She was a warrior. We started off just having a simple meeting and questioning a lot of what was happening. Why wasn't this person being looked at? What about this? And then we put together a petition. We had over 15,000 signatures to give up the case to the state. So that was out there. What else?
Yeah,
so many
protests. Our protests. So the day after our first protest, Van Buren reached out to MSP and asked for their assistance in the case. And that's what we were fighting for. So that was a huge win. That was our voices matter. We got it. We did it, you guys. Well, then we quickly realized that them assisting in the case wasn't good enough. We needed them to take over the case. So then we had another protest on August 19th. Well, August 20th, MSP showed up at Van Buren's door, and Van Buren they were able to convince Van Buren to give them the case the day after our second protest.
With no viable suspects, this left Egypt's family at a standstill. The Van Buren Police Department seemed to have no answers, and aside from that, they just didn't seem to have the resources they needed to solve the case. Once the case was handed over to the Michigan State Police, a big piece of evidence was discovered, leading to the arrest of Timothy Moore, Shandon Groom, and Shane Evans late last year. With this case going on for 3.5 years, do you know what piece of evidence or what was the point in which these people were arrested? Because I know in the past, Kenny had been a suspect, the ex-boyfriend had been a suspect in the murder. And because this was a random act of violence, there really weren't any tangible leads. And it's like all of a sudden the news just broke for the rest of us in the world kind of keeping tracks on this about these men being arrested. Do you have a sense of what the turning point was in finding that these were the men who did it?
The turning point was when Michigan State Police took over the case. And
right.
We had fought. And so as soon as Michigan State Police, and then what got them to solve it, I think, was the advanced technology that they have over the local department. They were able to do a geofence and do a 4-point square over the crime scene and get any devices that were used in that amount of time, the span, 2-day span that they asked for, and then they looked into those devices. So it's the technology that the small department just didn't have. And finding out that Egypt's phone left the crime scene and traveled along with the same pings as two of the suspects.
I think that was one of the pieces of evidence that had kind of caught my attention reading some of the case notes from yesterday. I feel like that would have been one of the first things the police would have noticed, is that, first of all, her cell phone is missing. It's not at her home. Clearly, she was Snapchatting, that evening. She had been texting. It's not like she lost her phone that day. It's not like she'd left it at yoga or something. It should have been in her home. If it wasn't there, why didn't they track the phone sooner?
No, I can't completely.
I have to do one of these.
I can't completely speak for Van Buren. They gathered everything that they needed to, but they, in a sense, they took a direction and they stuck with it. So I don't want to get into detail, but they stuck with that direction and I got a little tunnel vision. So.
We know now that these three men allegedly believed that Egypt's duplex neighbors, Megan and Steve, had marijuana in their home and were out of town at a music festival at the time. They planned to break into her home while no one was there and steal the marijuana. They instead broke into Egypt's home on accident, and while we don't know exactly what happened next, they then murdered her in her home. Last Thursday, a judge ruled that there is enough evidence for the three men to go to trial for first-degree murder. I want to hear what your reaction is to you and your family's reaction to the upcoming trial, to everything that's happening now. How are you all feeling?
I'm excited. I'm excited. This is what we've been fighting for. We are no longer doing our own research, investigating anything on here. We're done with all of that. It's in the right hands. It is still an open case and it's still being investigated, but by the right people. So we have full faith and trust in Michigan State Police. They've been phenomenal. And I think it's going to be anxious. We're just anxious, ready to get it going. I wish it was actually next week, but I know that it can't be because, we want it to be as full and as detailed as possible and put together. But yeah, this is what we've been fighting for, and there's no doubt in our mind that there's going to be convictions.
Yep. So. Absolutely. Same.
How do you feel?
Right there with her. Huge victory with the prelim. It's moving on to trial, and so confident that we're going to get some convictions. There's a lot of counts on those guys, and I'm sure most of them are going to hold.
Mm-hmm. Without the community support, this wouldn't be where it's at right now. And it's just been, we always want to make sure that is put out there.
We're going to go much further into detail about Egypt's murder on today's episode of our podcast, so be sure to check that out. We'll include links to all of our sources as well as Lindsay Ann's podcast in the details down below. We are so excited to introduce this week's guest, arriving from Arizona sunshine, the orange and baby Yoda. No, we have Wendy and Beth with us from the podcast Fruitloops, Serial Killers of Color. Beth and Wendy are two true crime enthusiasts who bring you stories about people of color who rarely get media coverage, bringing diversity to the true crime conversation. Wendy and Beth, thank you both so much for joining us today. We could not be more excited to finally meet the both of you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us. We're honored to be here. This is exciting. Yeah.
It's really peak for us.
I'm going to tell my mom, maybe now she'll be proud of me.
Mom, I made it to Murder News. So for our viewers who might be new to your show, can you tell us how the two of you met, how you discovered you both shared an interest in true crime, and sort of what inspired you to start the podcast?
Well, Beth and I have worked together for like 10 years, and she is super private and keeps to herself. She's just there to like get the job done and get the fuck out. So cut to 2016. I was listening to a ton of political podcasts and they all lied to me about what was going to happen. So then I was like, enough with political stuff. True crime just started popping into my feed and I was obsessed. And I don't know, Beth, we must have talked about I think the Atlanta child murder case. Payne, what's his name? That there was a podcast series that came out about the Atlanta child murders. And
Atlanta Monster.
And we both were like listening to it at the same time. And then I started listening to more true crime podcasts and I try to stump her, like, have you heard about this one, Beth? And she's like, duh, next. And I was like, have you heard of this one? And she like had so much true crime knowledge. I didn't even know it was possible for a person to know so much about true crime. And then the stumper was, well, if you know so much about true crime, Beth, can you tell me, are there any Black serial killers? Because I don't know of any. And she was like, yeah. And I was like, well, what the fuck? Where are they? Why aren't there any podcasts about them? And she was like, I don't know. There are no podcasts about them. And then we just started talking like, maybe we should just start it ourselves. And after a lot of research and a lot of mistakes, here we are.
Yeah, so we saw that the content was not there, so we wanted to do it.
Yeah.
That's great. And there was absolutely a need for it. And, you know, like the way that I had initially discovered you all is because I had been thinking that I wasn't getting enough of that in my podcast coverage. And I had heard some podcasters that I had listened to kind of gotten called out for not being representative of that. And I was like, I'm kind of feeding into that system. Like I'm only listening to podcasts that are covering white serial killers. And I had the same thing. And I was like, well, all serial killers are white men, right?
Yeah.
It's not true. Like the media is not covering it.
Yeah, and I think early on the podcasting space was actually a really very white male space.
Yes.
A lot of the podcasts were done by white males. And so there was also not a lot of stories about BIPOC and LGBTQ and other marginalized victims. So we wanted to hear those stories too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Like those cases weren't getting coverage too. And now I think there's some more podcasters coming into both of those arenas, but like y'all were the first, which is pretty amazing.
That makes us the OG, Wendy.
Yeah, I know. Oh my God, I'm finally an OG of something.
And you're both so good at it. Thank goodness.
Oh, wow, thank you so much. Yeah,
Tell your mom that one. You're the OG.
I can't wait. As soon as we are done, I will pick up the phone and call that woman. But yeah, I that's just to go back about when we started there, we were among a few. So Affirmative Murder was out.
I love Affirmative Murder.
Yeah.
And I think there might have been one from Canada that covered Indigenous true crimes, but there was really just a handful. So now there's a lot more. And that's really exciting to be a part of. So
it really is. Yeah.
It's great and very needed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah. Especially now.
Absolutely. So what is your true crime origin? What got you into this first place? Like, was there a murder in your hometown? Maybe a story that has always haunted you? Maybe it was just a TV show, you know, like Law and Order or something that you always watched as a kid. Like, what got you into this in the first place?
I think everybody, I don't know somebody who's not interested in crime. Everybody at least a little bit likes, you know, the police procedurals, which I don't watch anymore because they're racist. But anyway, everybody, you know, I loved Law and Order. Don't get me started. If you play the theme song, I will dance.
How do you even dance?
On that.
I would like to see it.
But yeah, I have always been interested in crime stories and, you know, the Dateline weekend episodes and, you know, a good murder show, but I never have been this immersed in it. And I didn't realize that there was this whole culture of true crime until I tapped Beth on the shoulder about it. So
yeah.
For me, I grew up in the Bay Area in the 70s, which was kind of the
That's enough right
heyday,
there.
serial killer heyday. Yeah. I actually wasn't really aware of what was going on, except for like maybe vague recollections of my mom telling me, be wary of strangers. Or I do remember a story about someone kidnapping kids or something, but I don't know what the truth of that was. But I didn't really get into true crime until I was older, and I read Helter Skelter about the Manson family murders. And then after that, I couldn't get enough. And I read every book I could get my hands on. I would go in the library and I'd go straight to the true crime section and check out all the books. And it was kind of like my dirty little secret, because people were not into true crime as much back then. There weren't the TV shows. There were no podcasts. But there was Unsolved Mysteries. I was really into that, and America's Most Wanted. I watched those pretty religiously. So that was my true crime origin. And then we also had a hometown serial killer here in Phoenix. Mark Goudreau, the Baseline Killer. And so we did our first episode on him. And we did a revisit on our 94th episode. It's a pretty crazy story, because there were actually 3 serial killers at the same time.
Okay.
Wow.
2 of them were the Phoenix shooters. That it was 2 white dudes who were driving all over the valley, shooting people at random. And then the Baseline Killer, who was raping and murdering women. And the Baseline Killer, it turned out, lived really close to where I was working at the time. And a lot of his crimes were committed within a 1-mile radius of where I worked. So that was pretty freaky.
It's really freaky.
Yeah. And again, I didn't even know about that case until I talked to Beth, and we work in the same place.
Wow, that's amazing to hear about stuff committed right close to you where you were after the fact.
Yeah.
Haunting.
Yeah.
So it can be hard to find information about serial killers of color, because, as you like to say, the media is racist, and often not a lot is written about the killers, and especially the victims. So what's your research process like?
Well,
oh boy.
Yeah. Well, so we each have our own approach. Beth is a very methodical, very detail oriented. She's a, stop me if I'm speaking out of turn, Beth, but she's a perfectionist, and she wants to find every article, every book. My approach to researching cases is YouTube videos, TV shows, and podcasts, and also what the streets are saying. And so we pick our list of cases, we set up Google Docs, and we each are just throwing stuff in there throughout the week. And then, a couple days before the show, she goes through and edits everything and cleans it up all nice and pretty. And then we record the show. It is really hard to find information on some of these cases, and when we find a case that doesn't have that much information, we put it on a back burner list. And hopefully more information will come in as time goes on, but we want to cover the case. We want to give respect to the victims, but another aspect of BIPOC and LGBTQ stories is the context, right? There's a reason why people of color are marginalized, why they all live in this certain area. So we have to talk about redlining. We have to talk, we talk about things like the Great Migration, which might not come up on another true crime podcast. Like, why was that gentleman's parents so strict? Well, because if you were a Black child in the 50s and you did something wrong, you could get killed. So we have to talk about those cultural aspects, which is actually pretty fun for us. So
yeah, and Wendy, of course, brings a lot more to the table in that respect than I do, because her perspective is invaluable in that regard. Yeah.
Glory tear. You can't see it on my orange.
because I have learned so much from her, that stuff that I just never even thought of before, because I'm white and just don't know. So.
Yeah.
And Beth is I have a very short list of white ladies that I love. And Beth is at the very top of it because she is, how especially now people are talking about allyship and what that really means.
Mm-hmm.
And I just appreciate Beth so much for being one of those women. I think I say she just happens to be white, but anyway, it's not her fault.
I can't help it.
She really has just been so there just needs to be more people like that, willing to learn. How can I do better? We're all learning all the time, we like to say on our show, and I am the biggest fuck up of them all. So I mean, and even though I am like a queer woman of color, I still have blind spots, and so I have to face that every day, and a white person may not. And Beth is the kind of white person who is like, I don't know it all, so I'm willing to learn, and that's why I appreciate it. And I love you, Beth.
You too.
I was thinking about this. Like what we would say when we got on this interview earlier today, and I think I might take a bullet for you, Beth.
Oh, that's so sweet.
That is so nice.
Yeah.
It's so amazing what you build by working on this stuff together, because like I'm sure, especially like collectively researching into the history of why things are the way they are and why things wound up the way they did with the specific crimes like involving people of color, I'm sure learning so much, and somewhat introspectively or
sometimes
just,
absolutely. Oh yeah. Sorry if I'm derailing the interview, but we did a case on a Canadian Indigenous woman recently. She burnt. Did it come out?
Lulanda Flat. I think her name was. Yeah.
I don't know it.
Well, it was fascinating. A, because I've never heard about it. B, she burned down a house full of people, but there was so much history and trauma that led for her and her community that led to this crime. And when we get to the trial, what is it called, Beth? A gladu?
Yeah.
Yes, you explain it, because it is the most amazing thing. Every country needs one. Go ahead, Beth.
If memory serves, they have somebody put a report together describing it's specifically for Indigenous people, describing their upbringing and the hurdles that they've had to cross, and all of the problems that they've had related to the fact that they're Indigenous.
Wow.
It's like a mitigating factors, but specific to being Indigenous.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Everyone should definitely have that. Really, like so many things come into play, and that's what makes it so tricky with like sentencing and stuff like that. Because
exactly.
Wow.
That's Canada. Woo-hoo.
Oh yeah. Here.
Now I know.
Yeah. Oh, Canada.
Yeah, but I only bring that up to say, like, we are learning so much, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
That's great.
Amazing.
And that's a really good example of the kinds of cases you all cover, which we love so much. And you've covered so many great ones. Two of my favorites of yours were the Twitter killer and the Skid Row slasher, which were both very new cases for me. Of all the cases you've covered, is there one particular case that keeps you up at night?
Oh boy. Go ahead.
Maybe several.
There's several. I mean, the hardest cases to cover are the ones where kids are harmed. Those are hard to research and talk about, and they kind of never leave you. I have really young kids, so those are challenging. But a true crime case that I go to bed at night and I'm like, I don't know if this person showed up. Richard Ramirez. Him just sneaking into people's houses and like stabbing them is terrifying to me. That case, the first time I heard about it, I couldn't sleep. And his photo, like I'm closing my eyes and seeing his face. That's one that never leaves on case to cover, because it has been covered numerous times. But we got to do it Fruit Loop style. So that was cool.
Dig into new
Yeah.
areas. He has a really
Yeah.
creepy one because he has like or had like no sort of limits. No like, oh, I prefer this. He's just like, I don't care, I'll do anything.
Right.
Like, whoa.
Yeah.
Ugh, no one's safe.
It was creepy as hell.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
For me, I also like the Twitter killer. That one was one of my favorite episodes to do because it was just a really interesting story, and we got to talk about Japanese culture, and I really like that. That bothers me a lot is the one we did recently called the guy's name is Luis Garavito. He's a Colombian, and he tortured and murdered children, lots of them. Hundreds. Yeah. And so that was pretty awful. I hated that episode.
Yeah, I could hear it in Beth's voice.
Yeah.
I was regretting doing it because she was so defeated. I felt so bad.
Well, it needed to be talked about.
Yeah.
It was a really hard episode for me. Another one that I found really interesting was Antoinette Frank. And she was a police officer in New Orleans, and she robbed a restaurant where she went frequently. She knew the family and everything, and she robbed them and killed a couple of the family members and another cop. It was a story.
Yeah.
Like why?
Yeah.
I'm so intrigued.
Yeah.
She was trying to get the bag. Trying to secure the bag.
I think she was a psychopath.
Wow.
Just wanted some money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
So where can our viewers find you on social media?
Well, we are all over the internets. Our website is fruitloopspod.com, and we're on Twitter and Instagram at fruitloospod.
Yeah, everything is pretty much Fruit Loops Pod.
Cool. All right. Well, be sure to subscribe to Fruit Loops wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss a single episode.
This week, we're watching The Irregulars on Netflix. If you liked Enola Holmes, this is probably right up your alley. And if you haven't seen Enola Holmes yet, go watch it. The 8-episode series follows a group of teenage kids living on the streets of Victorian London who solve old-timey crimes for none other than John Watson, while Sherlock Holmes takes all the credit. There are twists, turns, and supernatural elements, so it's really the perfect watch over the long holiday weekend. If you've seen the show, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks so much for tuning into This Week in True Crime with Murder News. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button below, give us a thumbs up, and tell all of your true crime friends.
Help support Murder News by visiting our Patreon at patreon.com/murdernews. We have some great benefits like merch, a shout out on our YouTube and podcast, exclusive episodes, and early access to tickets for our live online events. Your support helps us feed the MMN goats, add to our community wig wall, and help support our amazing writers that keep you up to date with the latest breaking news every day on murder.news. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. See you next week.